All right. Welcome to the Transitioning to Tech webinar, where we're going to have some perspectives from customer success leaders. We have two of them here. I'll just go directly over to their bios. My name is Brian. I'm going to be your host, but I think more importantly, we got Erica and James here. They're going to be speaking to you. Both of these are senior customer success leaders and also have some familiarity with pivoting from previous roles into customer success and into tech in the case of Erica. So I think we're going to have a really insightful opportunity here to chat with both of them. So Erica, how about we start with just some introductions or some, if you want to, Erica, take a swing at it and introduce us, tell us about your background, and then James, after that, we can jump into that, and then we'll describe some of the questions that we're going to answer.
Yes, thank you. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm excited for the conversation. I currently manage a team of customer success managers at Pendo. I've been here at Pendo for, coming up on 6 years. And before that, I spent some time at another tech company. I was a social worker before I became a customer success manager, when back then it wasn't really quite known what that was. So lots of fun stories, and I have kind of a history of bouncing around a little bit since I spent a year on the product team here at Pendo, but ultimately decided customer success was my home. So yeah, excited to chat with James, my former coworker, about this topic.
Awesome.
Yeah, awesome.
Go for it, James.
Yeah, good to meet everyone. Thanks for joining. And as Erica alluded, so 6 years ago, I started at Pendo as well. So Erica and I started at Pendo, I think it was like 6 days apart, coming in hot as the two new CSMs with a lot of opinions. But really excited to have this too. And I now work with Brian Childs at a company called Thought Industries. And so Brian and I work together really closely, and he kind of came to me, maybe some of you all saw his original LinkedIn post a couple of weeks back, and he came to me saying, hey, I'd love to be able to help these people, right? There's clearly a need in the market right now for these individuals who are thinking about moving into tech or doing a career change. Would you be open to kind of having a conversation with me where you can share some of your experiences? And so immediately said yes, and really excited to be here today. Our goal, Erica and I, is we want to just help you all as much as we can with tips or tricks, but I think our overlying message is it can be a tough transition. And so we want to also be able to kind of be honest and give feedback to people where it's not, a single LinkedIn DM to a manager of CS isn't going to get your pivot completed, but what does that really look like? And so my current role, I'm managing 5 CSMs. I have a peer on my side that runs EMEA, but I have 5 CSMs, about 160 accounts that roll up to my remit, and I report directly to our chief customer officer right now. I've been kind of the opposite of Erica. Customer success has kind of been my entire professional career. So about 9 years in all account facing roles. The first was at a PR agency, the last 8 all at software startups. And of those 4 of them, 3 of them were sub 100 companies. So companies that had less than 100 employees. And I think that's something we want to touch on a little bit later about when you think about breaking into the market, what may make the most sense there. And then my background degree, I was a PR major, business minor, and I entered tech after my first job. So I worked at a PR agency directly out of college, and then pivoted that into a marketing tech company. And so I think, again, that pivot we can talk about is how do you apply your background to maybe a product or technology that could be an end learner's perspective of expertise. So really excited to be here today.
Yeah, this is awesome. Well, welcome, Erica, and welcome, James. I think this is great. As a career changer myself, I know that these conversations are really, really helpful. It's like, I'll flip over to some of the topics that we have, kind of 2 big areas that we're going to be looking at. So for today's discussion, we kind of, Erica, James, and I went through and thought, what are some of the really important aspects here? Of course, preparing for the transition. So if you want to make this jump, what is that going to be like? What are some things that you can consider in that aspect? And then as you actually have a potential interview, or maybe you have an informational interview, what are some of the tips around that? So we've kind of broken this discussion into 2 parts. And I, again, as a career changer myself, these are the things that I wish someone had told me. So this is going to be a really great conversation. So let's go ahead and kick it off with the first part of this, which is the preparation. Now on the screen here is this question, how should I prepare? This is a great conversation starter for James and Erica. But then also underneath it, these are just some of the kind of bullets that that came up when we were discussing delivering this webinar experience. If you really want to hear about any one of these, feel free to throw that into the chat window and say, I really want to hear about that. If not, I think maybe we can start with Erica. Maybe we can ask this question to you: is what do you think is one of the really key things that someone should think about when they are preparing for a transition? And then James, you can kind of pile on with what Erica says there.
Yeah. Well, I think it just requires a lot of thought. And typically by the time you decided, like, I don't want to do what I'm currently doing right now, to like, I'm going to completely change my career, hopefully you've already given it a lot of thought and considered all the pros and cons. But I think the biggest thing is, you kind of have to just start somewhere, and preparing the resume is a big one, because that's going to help you figure out kind of the holes or the gaps or the opportunities of, what are the transferable skills that I have. And I'd actually really love to see in the comments, like, what are you currently doing? Like, if everyone can just kind of type in the current industry that you're in, maybe we can use some of those examples to talk through like transferable skills. A lot of folks are probably going to be education. I know, like teachers and things like that. Maybe some social workers are out there, but yeah, I think the biggest thing is the reframing your background for CS roles is really important, because it's a tough market out there now, and you really need to sell yourself, and you have to be your own best marketer.
So what Erica would you say are some of the ways? I know that this resume question of like, I'd say that's probably the most common thing that I hear, and it's certainly something I experienced in transitioning from aviation, is I just really didn't know how to describe what I did to a technology company. Like, I just used dumb words, and my resume was probably horrific. I don't even want to go back and look at it. It's probably embarrassing. But like, what are some of maybe like the top 2 or 3 things that you'd say really need to happen in this reframing of a resume?
Well, I can speak for me. I had a number of different roles as a social worker. One of the roles that I had was working in a detention center for young girls. Wow. And so that was really challenging. And so I thought about all of the aspects of that role. How does that relate to customer success? I did a lot of, I guess, conflict resolution, escalations. So, so you just kind of have to think about it in that way. So look at your current resume and how can I tailor this to the job description? I mean, that's kind of like 101 for when you're applying to a job, is making sure that your resume is tailored specifically to that company and to that role. So side by side compare, what are they looking for? What skills do I have? And how do I essentially reframe it to, be in line with what they're looking for? So if it's a teacher, create account plans or create lesson plans. Like, that's highly transferable to have that sort of like thought and foresight into how you're going to strategically plan out your day for this group of people. That's essentially what you're doing in customer success as well. So try not to get bogged down in the whole, like, it's totally different. I'm a teacher and this is children, these are adults. Like, no, like we're not, we're not going to look at that. We're truly just going to sell yourself. So I would think through that piece of it.
Is there for either of you, is there a place that you would go? Like, how might I learn what some of those words are? I would assume that like I might be able to go to like a job description and just like, copy the job description, put it over onto my resume just as bullets and suss it up a little bit. But like, are there other places you might go to figure out how to do that language correctly, or the decoder ring, to figure out like if I say teacher and like planning, curriculum planning, like what's the other side of the decoder ring? Do either of you have recommendations on where to look for that information?
Yeah, I mean, I put one in the chat. So there's a million customer success resources specifically. So I put one specific to customer success, but I think there's probably like a zoomed out version, or kind of even a step back to some of the stuff Erica was saying, is like, understanding, so you say, how should I prepare to go into tech? Like, why do you want to go into tech? We have so many people now who are in previous industries, and tech is just sort of this mecca. And I've hired so many people who have come in and hated it. It takes like a very specific type of personality and passion for you to be successful in a fast-paced startup world. And I think before you even think about the role or moving in, like, try to get to a place where you can be honest with yourself of what are you looking for in your next role and what's going to make you happy. I ask people, what causes you stress? What happens if you get Saturday emails from your boss? Like, all of these things, think about how you react and what type of life you want to have, and realize if the tech world is right for you, because it's intense. I love my career, but I've had many people come in and out of it and it wasn't right for them. And the pivot's a hard one. And so if you're going to make it, you probably want to make sure you've done some thought into like the real long term of what your career would look like and if the environment's right for you. And so I think, kind of playing on top of that, outside of customer success terminology, there's a ton of software tech terminology you probably need to learn to just even understand the industry. I say SaaS all the time, which stands for software as a service. And I would say, like, just looking into the SaaS model, how it works, what are the teams like? Do you understand how a product team works with an engineering team, with a pre-sales team versus post-sales versus professional services? Like, there's just so many components of that model in a SaaS that you're just going to have in your mind and in your terminology to even kind of get to the place where at the customer success level, you're able to talk about how your skills could be relevant to that job. And so I think kind of there's a hold up of a mirror approach here that's probably the first step in preparing as well.
I think that's fantastic advice. I think that learning sort of the map of the mall in a software company is really helpful, because people will use, even what we're saying here, customer success and support and customer experience and SaaS and this language, it's like culture is language. And so being able to speak to that and understand that when people are talking about what a salesperson does versus what a customer success person does, and so that you can kind of craft your story so you don't end up telling this story that literally everybody else in the room is going to map to a different part of the organization. I think that's a really fantastic advice there. One of the things that we brought up when we were talking previous to actually launching the webinar here is this concept of like mentorship. Like, one of the things is like maybe having a shepherd to help you through this. Any advice for people about what makes a good mentor, or who they should actually go to kind of get help with this, other than just maybe the documentation that they might be able to look up? Like, what's your recommendation on who they should kind of try to partner with in this transition?
Yeah, there's so many resources. I think one of the free resources you can go to, is any of the blogs. There's something called Gain, Grow, Retain. I don't know, James, you got a link to it, link it in the chat. Gain, Grow, Retain is a community of customer success managers and leaders, and you can post things, post content. They have weekly office hours where, those folks are more than happy to engage. And I'm sure if you ask, like, hey, can someone help? There's going to be someone who says yes, because it's just the customer success community is very, like, we stick together. And so I think that's a good place to start. Also, if there's just a company you're interested in, you could always reach out on LinkedIn and see if somebody would be willing to chat with you about the role or what it's like there before you make an ask, of any mentor. Before you make an ask, just try to get to know them and see if there's something that you can also offer them as well.
Yeah. And James, you had mentioned something previously about, like, you started with a lot of smaller companies, like sub 100. Do you think that's a good approach? Is to, like, if you're focusing in, is it like, what size of company would be a good place to start for people to like focus in on?
Yeah, for sure. I think on the mentor side, to like, kind of to my point, there's the tech side and the customer success side, which probably most of you in your friend groups, you have someone in tech. So I think someone finding that can coach you through some of like what that world looks like. On the customer success side, and I mean this with zero arrogance, but we get a lot of messages, right? A lot of LinkedIn messages when you're in senior manager, director, chief customer roles from people and all backgrounds and stuff. And it's not that we don't want to help everyone. It's just really tough. And so, like, my biggest recommendation for people to try to always break in is find someone that would be a peer to you. Like, who is someone that's been in customer success for a year or 2 years. And these are the people, right? It's good for them career to be able to turn around and mentor you. And there's, for every one of me, there's 10 CSMs at Thought Industries, right? So the capacity for these people, it's great for them to mentor you. They can share what it's like to first get in, what they did. As opposed to you all, shooting your shot at the CCO of Slack or something like that.
Don't do it.
I would just try to bring it down and really, because once you can get to that mentorship level at a peer level, those people are gonna, if you say, hey, can I have 30 minutes for coffee once a month with you, just to pick your brain? After that point, right, you're gonna get natural introductions and more tips. And, my CSMs will reach out to me and say, I've been talking to this person that's been a rock star. Would you be open to chatting with them?
Oh, that's great advice. So shoot lower in the organization then, because those people are going to be like, having recently gotten the role, they might have more time, things like that.
For sure. And I think that the other thing I would just say is people kind of always want a reference or a favor-ish. Whereas if you tell me hey, I applied to this role, here's a couple extra facts, do you mind taking a look? That to me is easier, where I can, ping HR and be like, hey, this person reached out, they gave the extra touch. Let's get some eyes on this and see if they're open for a screen, versus me having to do the work of okay, well, now you're wanting me to look at your resume and set up a screen. It's just sort of what's easiest for the hiring manager is probably best for you. And then in regards to what Brian was alluding to, and I think Eric and I can both attest to this, is at least in our experience, don't shoot for the top 100 SaaS company. We got in at ground floor companies. I was employee 60 at Zift, 70 at Pendo, Thought Industries, I was 90, right? It's going to be these small startups who are willing to take a chance on talent that's maybe not have, the completely solid resume background. And Erica, I think you would probably agree with that.
Oh yeah. I got rejected a lot from these larger companies, and I was kind of spray and pray and was just desperate, right, for anybody to give me a shot. And I even had a friend who was at a larger company and they just rejected me. And so I was employed 20 at this company, local company here. And yeah, they were just way more open to giving me a chance, because like James said, they kind of have less risk. They're moving fast. They're trying to hire. They're also, looking for talent. So yes, definitely don't try to go for the large Slacks of the world when you're trying to break in.
I applied to Google, and I don't think me being but I use Google every day. They're that's not the experience we're looking for. I have 2 Gmail accounts. This is really great.
Getting in early to startup too is one of the most fulfilling things ever in my career, because you get to build and you'll get to try on a bunch of different hats. So even if you start as CS, you'll be able to play with every department really closely and really figure out where you want to go. So this is LinkedIn, you can pick companies, search software industry, employees sub 100. There's also I live in Denver right now. There's Denver Startup Week, right? And there'll usually be a publication where it says, here are the hottest 50 startups to keep an eye on, right? And these are the type of things that even today, that's what I look at. That's what I really have a curiosity in, is those smaller companies that are growing and need someone that's scrappy and willing to dig in and kind of wear many hats. So that's worked out well for Eric and I, at least.
Yeah, that's great advice. And yeah, it's you end up having a lot of different experiences, a lot of growth opportunities. And there's another aspect as well that I will sometimes say to people, which is when you're making these transitions, sometimes you got to point at the second job, not the first job, right? So it's realize that you're going to go. So what I think a lot of people are they think software, they think I'm going to make, $150,000 a year and I'm just going to go for it. And you might just allow yourself to accept the smaller company with a smaller salary, with the expectation that you're going to spend a year or 2 there building up that resume so that you can then make the jump to the next role. And these smaller businesses are places where it's they'll probably give you more of a shot. And I think that both Erica and James represent that.
It's the opportunity outweighs the cost sometimes. And also for just doing your homework, I think shows that you're really serious, because I think one of the biggest fears for hiring managers when you're kind of interviewing people who aren't in that industry currently is, are they just desperate for the next thing? Are they really committed to customer success, or are they running away from where they're currently at? And so doing your homework by, engaging in these communities, and that's even something you can put on your resume. Member of, the customer success community, If you contribute to the, like a blog post, that is content that you can directly say that you created. There are certifications now, Success Hacker. You can literally become certified in customer success management. That did not exist back in the day. So you have things that you can say like, I'm serious about this. I am certified level 1, 2, 3. I think it goes up to 5. So, I think the foundations are there for you to learn. And then it's just about putting it into practice.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and flip the slide. This is like the shortest slide deck ever. I love it. We had a question from Caitlin earlier, which is how important are digital portfolios, digital interactive resumes, and websites when applying for customer success roles? And I think that kind of goes into how should I practice for interviews? So we've talked a lot about like sort of, activities that can set you up for success. But when it comes to actually the interview process, I think some of this we covered a little bit here previously, but like, what are some of these things that you'd suggest? Like, what about Caitlin's question here? Like, is a digital portfolio relevant? Like, what makes a person stand out?
I think like yes and no, I guess. Like having a good LinkedIn presence is kind of like a non-negotiable. Like that's got to be there. There's got to be a LinkedIn. It's got to be updated. I'm big on like recommendations. Like if you have recommendations from your previous professionalism, that's great. You can see them at the bottom. And I like have asked, you ask your peers for them, especially as you're trying to do a career pivot. But I've gotten people send me their personal website and stuff like that. And I don't know your thoughts, Erica, but it's sort of like great, but like for our industry, it's not super important for that type of presence or in customer success.
No, I would say like not, especially if you've never done it before. How can you have that? I think the biggest thing is maybe the certifications. And I think you should be prepared for there to be some sort of exercise during the interview process. So don't come surprised, if you're asked to do a quarterly business review. And if you have no idea what that is, that's why these types of, programs are really helpful. For me, when I was interviewing, I had to basically do like a training, and thankfully they let me do the training on whatever it was that I wanted to talk about. And I saw somebody mention in the comments that they were a photographer. And so I did photography for about 6 years. And so I basically did a training on how to write a blog post because I had been writing blog posts related to my photography. So I used what I knew, and I, made sure I hit all the bullet points of how to train someone, because back then that's what customer success was. It was very much like training and showing people how to use the product and, making sure you're delivering value and communicating value. So that's what I did. And I had a friend who helped me hit all the topics and all that stuff. So definitely be prepared for that. And you might even offer it, if you sense there's hesitation, you might want to offer, hey, I'm happy to do a demo for you, or I'm happy to do like a fake business review, and just in case that they say like, I don't know if you can actually do this.
So can you, I think you mentioned a couple of these there, but so when you're hiring folks, what are you looking, what are some of the things you're looking for in those mock presentations or things like that? Is it communication skills? Is it like the ability to sell? Like what are some of these nuances that people should consider if they are going to get into that situation?
Yeah, for me, it's communication. There's always an air of like, people are nervous, whatever, but it's a lot of presence. It's a lot of like establishing rapport quickly. Confidence is another one. And honestly, just the ability to deliver value. I think that's the biggest one too. Nowadays, customer success is all about how are we delivering value? How are we showing people that this product that they purchased is actually making an impact in their day-to-day? So if you come to the table with data, that immediately will grab my attention, because if you're being strategic and data-driven about your approach, then I think that is a really key factor of being a customer success manager nowadays. So if you're, for example, if you're a teacher and you say, you did the following lesson plan, which resulted in an increase in your not your team, your class's scores, right? Like you increase.
We can't even not to speak in tech, like
I
your customers, all of your
customers.
small customers in your classroom.
But they are your customers,
They are,
right?
they are your
So
customers.
they're your
Exactly.
customers. And so if you can say that you had a measurable impact in the results of your class, like that's actually a really interesting way to frame it.
And it sounds like maybe, you know, I don't know, James, if this comes up when you're interviewing, but saying these examples, it sounds like it would be really important for people to kind of, I mean, this sounds dumb, but to understand what that product does or what that service does. Like if they're in SaaS, if they're going into tech, it's like really being able to say some of the language and understand some of the positioning and the value. So here's Erica, you're talking about value and you're talking about outcomes. And it sounds like that might be something that people want to do, is actually go and make sure you understand what that product is. And it's not just like me, you know, applying to Google because Google's Google.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely. And I think the reason we kind of want to have this section, folks, is that like, we understand the mountain right now is like getting to your phone screen, right? Like that's probably the biggest overcoming hurdle you feel like you're going through, but like that's kind of half the battle, right? So how do you, I mean, in a standard tech interview, you usually have 4 rounds. You know, you'll meet with the recruiter, HR person, the hiring manager, then there'll be an on-site panel for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, and then a meeting with the exec. And so like, how do you get through that process? And it sounds super intense, but this is sort of, unfortunately, sometimes the reality. I think in these smaller companies, you maybe don't have to go through all of that. But the biggest thing, if I have someone that's in a career pivot, you know, we have this. So at Thought Industries, our platform is a customer education platform, and we've hired a lot of people with education backgrounds. And so that's great. But when I'm in my interview with customer success, I need you to start applying that into customer success words. You know, so I need to hear, whether it's in your direct examples or questions you're asking me, it needs to be name dropping business reviews and churned accounts and net revenue and business, you know, like health scoring. Like these are the things that I need to hear to understand that you kind of get what we do as well. And so I think like trying to figure out how you can kind of, you know, put your terms here and customer success terms here and do like the best mapping that you can, I think is really important. The other thing I would just say is that I follow this woman, her name's Stella, and I want to say her last name, but I didn't get approval, but she did this switching from teacher to tech thing. And she created a challenge for 365 days. She was going to post on LinkedIn every single day. And I think it was like around like day 180, she ended up getting a job at a great company that wasn't a startup. But that like personal brand, it is not many people's strengths, right? It is a pain. It is awkward. It's embarrassing, but like, but it's something you probably, you know, it's only going to help you if you can put a photo. You know, if you look back, I have videos on mine when I was trying to get a job that get shared and then you're at 12,000 views, right? There's so many things like that that are just going to help you get a foot ahead too of people, even if you're just commenting on things or taking a Gainsight article and reposting it and then taking a churn 01 and linking to the webinar and saying, I found this helpful, you know, tagging them, things like that. Like just try to make a little bit of a name for yourself. Because hopefully we're going to stalk your LinkedIn then going into the interviews and ask you some of these questions about, you know, your engagement in the community.
Great advice. Yeah. LinkedIn is where a lot of this stuff happens, you know, and it's like, be careful with it, you know, make sure you put your best foot forward, but also be yourself, you know, like I think we all look for people that have diverse backgrounds and, you know, can speak about interesting things. And, you know, it's like, you know, it doesn't have to be this, you know, boring, you know, page that you're posting.
Yeah, you got to find what gives you your edge too. You know, like for me, I think my big thing is I keep calm under very hostile,
Thanks, James.
situations. So I just feel like, you know, whatever your background is, there's something there that makes you special and will be really special in this new role. And so I think that's another thing to kind of think about, play up, especially in the interview process. And I think it does make you unique. It makes you go, huh, like, interesting. This person is, you know, a teacher. I wonder why they, you know, think they're going to be, you know, good for this role. And if you can wrangle, you know, 30 plus kids or however many kids, you can manage being a CSM because it's hard out there for sure.
I think that like the easiest, like the natural, probably like obvious thing here too, right, is to try to pivot into a similar industry. So like, I was in PR, then I worked at a marketing agency, and I worked at a marketing tech company, which is email automation. Well, like my brother's owned car dealerships for 10 years and he's considering pivoting. And I'm like, there's so much car software companies, automotive software, because then you can provide your value as the learner. You would be the end user to the software.
Totally.
Here's how I think I could best consult. And so I think, even I think I saw like cosmetologists, like I know there's like cosmetology software and booking schedules and revenue recognition and invoice, like think about things that you could like very blatantly speak to in your real world. Even education, I have as a company, as clients, I have education, incredible software startups that do like great things with virtual learning and grading and gamification with your students. And like, there's so many things there that you can, that's probably like where you should start to get your foot in the door as well.
100%. Yeah, I was in aviation, and my first job out of aviation was in an aviation business, and I just wasn't flying the planes. I was just working on them. Or I was working, with like selling them. So I think it helps because it allows the nearness of the language. Like, again, language is a big part of this, is being able, I think it's come up several times, where it's like being able to speak to this. And even what Amber just mentioned, be the SME, be the subject matter expert. It allows, that's a very empowering place, because you're going to find yourself being like, oh, they're talking about me, or we're selling to me. I think another aspect too is that in COVID, COVID's kind of like allowed for more location flexibility with folks. So it's not like you have to be in the Bay Area, you have to be in Denver to make it work. It's like, I think a lot of these companies are fine with remote work, but then there's also expectations, about like work culture and just kind of understanding how to work in that environment, which might be very different. So I'll just kind of go ahead and go first off. So we're kind of at the into the half hour here in a couple minutes, but I think both, Erica and James we're happy to answer questions. But I just wanted to say, for everybody that joined, thanks for joining. It's like we put this on for you. Hopefully this is an interesting conversation for you, and that it's given you a couple little nuggets to think about. But I think we can open it up for more kind of Q&A. So if you want to type into the chat there, if you have questions. If not, again, thanks a lot for coming. Anybody got any questions for James or Erica?
Yeah, feel free to come off mute too if you just want to ask the question. And I feel like we threw a lot of information out there. I know there'll be a follow-up with like the resources and everything, but
yeah, Eric and I are not afraid to talk. We'll tell you that. We probably both talked a million miles a minute.
And I have in my great wisdom, I muted everybody. So if somebody wants to come off mute, just
there's a question from David too right now.
David, okay, Erica, when did you know CSM was for you?
That is a great question. I was really lucky. I think I just stumbled upon it. I grew up in a very small town in South Georgia where tech was not a thing. And my mom was a social worker, and I knew I wanted to help people. And so I was like, cool, I love helping people. I'll just be a social worker. So I got my master's in social work from the University of Georgia, go Dogs. And then I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was like, doing that, of course, that's the only thing I was thinking of. And I just got really like burnt out, honestly. I felt like there was a lot of red tape. There was a lot of kind of politics in government. I worked for the state of North Carolina, and it was really hard. And so I had a friend who was doing the same job at the time. I was working with people with disabilities to help them find jobs. And my coworker went to a company and became a customer success manager. And as soon as he did that, he was like, Erica, you have to do this. This is exactly what you need to be doing. You get to help people, but it's tech, so it's a little more, flexible and not as kind of, And so I was like, okay, I'll try it out. And so everything he was describing, I was like, that sounds like something I would want to do. And customer success back then was not as popular. And so, and I just started looking into it. And luckily, as soon as I got into customer success, I just knew it was a really good fit. So it was, long story short, it was just kind of a random happy accident that I landed in customer success, because he could have gone somewhere else and been like, you should be in marketing, but it didn't happen that way.
We have a good question here from Spring. So thank everybody. Thanks for answering the questions. We'll kind of go through them as we go. So who would you say CS is not for? So, James, you kind of mentioned that like sometimes with both tech and with the customer success roles, that maybe it's not a very good fit. What are some of the things that someone should self-assess where they'd be like, maybe this customer success, not necessarily tech, but customer success itself might not necessarily be a good pursuit?
Yeah, I mean, I think at its core with CS, and I don't know the exact right word, but you're going to be in front of a customer kind of all day, every day. I mean, I think when I was an individual contributor, I'd probably have 6 to 7 hours, which means you're on, which means you're talking to people and you're like actively listening. It can be an exhausting thing. And I know people sometimes recharge from not being, talking to people constantly. If you're someone like that, like it's probably going to be tough, especially at a startup. You are going to be like on the grind, talking to your customers every day. And a big portion of that is probably frustrated customers, and I think, think of if you've ever worked at a restaurant or retail, it's probably not that different than that. You're going to get people who you think are unreasonable. You're going to get people who you think are reasonable, but you're getting pushback internally. There's going to be a lot of like risk management that you have to deal with. And that if you can't kind of let go of that, it's probably not going to be a great fit for you. If you can be able to kind of come on to it and leave it there afterwards, it's great. I think the other thing it's such an intangible, but like, I believe you have to have like a level of empathy. Like I say, like customer centricity is in my freaking core. Like I will go to bat internally. I will fight for my customers. I will like push it to the rooftops. Like that is my passion. And I've known that forever. And so I think there's like an innate, I don't want to say like people pleasing, but just like the empathy for understanding people's hardships, and like truly wanting to help them, I think is something that has to be present.
That's great.
You gotta like people, and you gotta let things roll for sure. Agree, empathy with James. You also, I feel like you have to kind of be organized too. You kind of have to be a go-getter too, not just related to people, but there are aspects of customer success that are kind of, sometimes it's I don't want to say a thankless job, but sometimes it is. And, my background coming from social work, I just had the perspective of, well, no one's trying to beat me up today. So like, just gotta have to like let things roll and know that like this customer that's angry, you have to be like, okay, thank you very much for your feedback and just move it along. So if you've been in retail, if you've been in fast food or retail or whatever, that it can be hard to deal with people. So that's the number one thing. If you don't like people, don't be a customer success manager.
Right. There's certainly a lot of tenacity. I mean, James is a force of nature at TI, and that is around compassion for and empathy for the customer, but also like, he mentioned it himself. There's a lot, like it's a big team. And so it's a team of people that are all trying to raise and elevate these challenges. And so that tenacity, looking from the outside, I see that as another big aspect, to be like, you have to go and find somebody who's going to get your customer the value that you believe that they either deserve or need, or to make sure the relationship happens. And
problem solving.
Totally.
Solving, creativity.
Yeah. So we got another couple questions in here. Let's see, answer the one, Caitlin, hopefully that was acceptable, about like where to look for some small companies, memorable impact statements that sparked your interest in a candidate. I think we mentioned a couple of those, was like translating things into numbers. Any additional advice there for that person about what impact statements you're kind of like make for interesting, or is it just kind of like too broad?
For me, it's a lot of the like one, there's basics where like this may be stupid, but like if you know anything about me, it's already like a green check. Like look into my background, my software experience, and kind of like bring some of those up. How did you break in? Blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would say is just, as much as your story is important, it's got to be about like, it's like the right questions in the interview too. Like if you can ask me throughout, like, oh, well, how do you manage EBRs? Or, oh, does your CSM team manage renewals, or do they do their own onboard? Like if you can ask me things that make me be like, okay, even though they maybe haven't done this directly, they get it.
Yeah.
Those are things
Not
that
about you.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you can relate your experience to the business, and I always say this to my team, anyone who's like looking to change fields or get a promotion, it's what are you doing for them. It's not about you. Like, it's really about you, but it's not about you. It's about the company. It's about the hiring manager and what are you going to do for them? So I love that advice of like, don't focus on yourself as much as you're focusing on what you can bring to the organization.
Yeah. Sales, it's kind of like sales 101, which is like, you know, and James mentioned it here. It's like, if I can talk about James to James, it's like, he's going to like it, you know, like we all love for people to like, use
I
our
wasn't
name.
going to say that, but you said.
Well, it's just, I mean, an interview is what? It's kind of a sales process.
Well, I've had people who are just like, you know, oh, where do you live? Or, oh, how long have you been? You know, just things that like you should come with the connections immediately in your mind. You know,
an
like,
inappropriate amount of stalking took place. You're like, you haven't stalked enough prior to this. Why do you ask these questions?
I also like the last thing I was gonna say there too is like, and this may be natural for me because I'm kind of like a bold person, but like in interviews, I'll say like, hey, like I want this job, you know, and I feel like confident that I want to be able to help you all, or, you know, like something I say internally at all is I want to be great. And, you know, I tell people that because that's what I want, you know, so I try to like not do the hard close, like, don't tell me, do you have insecurities about our interview? Like you can ask that, but we get that a lot and it's kind of an awkward thing. But like say, like, just so you know, like I'm passionate about this role and I really want to move into tech. And so whether this works out or not, I'd love your advice, you know, give the human touch point there and kind of like put the heat on.
Yeah.
That's why we recommend starting small, because I see there's a question about like the applicant bubble, and, you know, start with a company that's not going to have this crazy amount of volume. It's literally a person looking through, you know, resumes. Like, you know, I think that's why it's so key to really make sure you're narrowing your focus, because I wish someone had told me like, girl, don't bother with these large companies because you're going to be feeling real rejected.
Totally.
And so start small. And I also think that goes to show like, you're like, hey, I haven't applied anywhere else. And these smaller companies feel special that you're like looking specifically at them. So
100%.
as much as you really want to work at like the cool company down, you know, that's like up and coming, like, you know, you got to start small.
Yeah. And I think for many of us, anybody who has transitioned, I think one of the commodities that we have to deal with is that sense of rejection, right? And it just builds up and builds up and builds up. And so some of it is about like giving yourself the best chance at bats, where it's like, if you just get rejected for 6 months straight, it starts really taking an emotional toll. And if you can kind of make it so that those swings are a little bit higher likelihood to connect, and maybe you get some interviews, but they don't turn into jobs, but either way, you're kind of moving forward. I think it's pretty safe to say that with transitioning, when you're going from one business type to another, that's like, you should expect that it just isn't going to work out when you try to go for too large of companies.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, the companies that are these like big established companies, they can be a little more picky. They are going to be getting the folks that have had customer success experience for the last 10 years. Yep. And so they're not going to be willing to take that risk. But if you've got a small startup who's just like really looking for people who are scrappy and go-getters, they're more likely to be like, you know, can go grab coffee with you if it's a local company, or just take the what we call risk, right? Like to hire. But that's why selling yourself is so important, is call it out. Like, hey, I know I don't have any customer success experience, but here's how this role really transfers and is going to prepare me to be a really amazing customer success manager.
Yeah. Well, hey, I really want to thank, let's take a minute and just really thank James and Erica for joining us today. Thank you for all the questions. I know we didn't get to all of them necessarily, but you know, keep an eye out. I'm always happy to help organize these conversations. For those of you that are in the hunt for these, you know, it takes time. It takes a lot of energy. Just keep at it. I know sometimes the rejection can be really difficult, but there are jobs out there, and you do matter. But thank you so much for James and Erica for putting some time in and having this conversation with me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brian. And everyone out there, you'll land the right place, I promise.
Got this.
Anything else we can do to help, let us know.
Yep. Cheers. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Have a great week.
Bye.